Scene opens with a quiet, serene morning in a suburban neighborhood. The camera zooms in on a small, unassuming house nestled at the corner of a street lined with tall trees. The front yard, though well kept, looks a little worn, like it hasn't been touched in years. Inside, the atmosphere is still and heavy, as if time has slowed down. We hear the faint sound of a clock ticking, echoing in the empty room. Cut to an elderly woman, Margaret, sitting by the window. Her frail hands clutch a cup of tea, her eyes gazing out into the world that seems to have passed her by. There's a sadness in her eyes, the kind that comes from years of solitude. Margaret has lived here for decades, but now, she's alone. Her children live far away, and her friends are long gone. The world outside seems to continue without her. The silence is overwhelming, and each passing day feels the same as the last. The doorbell rings suddenly, breaking the silence. Margaret's heart skips a beat. She hasn't had visitors in a long time. She slowly rises from her chair, wincing as she moves, and approaches the door. Her footsteps are slow and deliberate, like she's unsure if this moment is real. The sound of her shuffling feet fills the quiet space, adding an eerie sense of stillness to the scene. The camera stays focused on her face, her hesitation, her uncertainty, and then the flicker of hope as she opens the door. Margaret, softly, who is it? Standing at the threshold is none other than Donald Trump. He's not in a suit today, but in a simple jacket, looking every bit as surprised to be here as she is. His signature blonde hair is combed neatly, his expression serious, but there's a warmth in his eyes. He's holding a large bouquet of flowers in his hands, an unexpected gesture from someone of his stature. Trump, smiling gently, hello, Mrs. Margaret. I know this might sound strange, but I've been thinking about you. Margaret stands frozen, unsure if she's dreaming. What could this powerful, well-known man want with her? Her breath catches in her throat as she stares at him, her mind racing. The confusion is evident on her face, and the camera lingers on her reaction, capturing every moment of disbelief. The camera zooms in on her face, capturing the raw emotions, confusion, disbelief, and a hint of curiosity. She takes a moment before she speaks again. Margaret, you've been thinking about me. Trump steps forward, holding out the flowers. Trump, I'm not here to disrupt your life, Mrs. Margaret. I heard you were alone. And sometimes, people just need to know that they matter. Margaret's eyes well up with tears. She doesn't know how to respond. This is the last person she expected to show up at her doorstep. And yet, here he is, offering her not just flowers, but something far more valuable, acknowledgement, human connection. It's not the flowers, but the words that make her heart swell with emotion. She takes the flowers with trembling hands, as if afraid this moment will slip away. Margaret, softly, thank you. I didn't expect anyone today. It's been so long. Trump steps inside, without hesitation, a quiet determination in his step. As he enters, he glances around the modest living room. The furniture is old, but there's a quiet dignity in the way it's arranged. He takes a deep breath, letting the room's energy settle in. He looks back at Margaret, his voice softening as he takes a seat. Trump, people forget how important it is to check in on those who are forgotten. I've been in situations where I felt overlooked, and I realized there are others who feel that way too. You don't have to be forgotten, Mrs. Margaret. Margaret stares at him, her eyes wide. She's never been one to ask for attention, never wanted to burden anyone with her loneliness. But there's something in Trump's voice, something genuine, that makes her believe he truly means it. The camera holds on Margaret's face as she processes his words. There's a visible shift in her demeanor, a softness in her features that hadn't been there before. It's as if the weight of the world has lifted from her shoulders, and for the first time in years, she feels seen. The camera cuts away briefly, showing the stark contrast between Trump's busy life and Margaret's quiet, solitary existence. His world is filled with meetings, cameras, and crowds. But for a moment, He's left all of that behind to be with her. As the two sit together in the cozy living room, the conversation begins to flow. Trump listens intently as Margaret tells him stories from her past, stories of a time when the house was filled with laughter, of days spent in the company of friends and family. But now, those voices are silent, and the empty space around her is filled only with memories. The weight of those memories sits heavily in the air. Margaret begins to recount her younger days, her voice shaking slightly at the edges. She talks of her late husband, Jack, a man full of life and joy, who once made their home the heart of the neighborhood. She talks about their children, who now live far away with families of their own. She speaks of how, over time, the house grew quieter and quieter, until the silence was all that remained. Margaret, wistfully, Jack used to say this house had a soul. It felt alive when we were all together. But now, it's just walls. Empty walls. Trump leans forward, his expression soft. He's not just hearing her words, but feeling them. There's no grand solution, no grand gesture that can fill the space left behind by time. But there's something in the way he listens, in the way he doesn't rush her, that makes Margaret feel as if she's important again. Trump, time changes everything, doesn't it? But some things don't change. Like the way we need each other. People forget that, sometimes. Margaret looks at him, a soft smile creeping onto her face. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to be so real, so human. Margaret, softly, you're right. I used to think the world was moving too fast, but now I feel like I'm standing still. The camera lingers on their faces, capturing the quiet, intimate moment. There's a sense of peace in the room now, something that hadn't been there when Margaret was alone. They share a look, one that says more than words ever could. As the hours pass, Margaret and Trump share stories, laughter, and moments of quiet reflection. It's a day neither of them will forget. Margaret, once so isolated and forgotten, now feels seen. Trump, who had entered with the intention of simply offering a gesture of goodwill, finds himself changed by the experience. He begins to understand that sometimes, offering someone your time is the most valuable gift you can give. Margaret begins to feel a spark of hope she thought was long gone. She hasn't had this kind of conversation in years, and she finds herself enjoying the way Trump listens, the way he doesn't judge or rush her. It's not just the flowers, though they are beautiful, it's the genuine connection. Trump, you know, Mrs. Margaret, it's not too late. Life isn't over just because we've reached a certain age. Every day is a new opportunity. I think it's time for you to let the world back in. Margaret smiles, a little tear slipping down her cheek. It's a tear of gratitude, of hope. Margaret, smiling through her tears, maybe you're right. Maybe I've been afraid of moving forward. As the sun begins to set, Trump stands to leave, his jacket now slightly askew, his demeanor softened. Margaret stands with him at the door, the bouquet of flowers still clutched in her hands. Trump, I'm glad I came, Mrs. Margaret. I'll check in on you again soon, all right? Margaret nods, her heart lighter than it's been in years. Margaret, tears in her eyes, thank you, truly. You've done more than I could ever ask for. Trump smiles warmly as he steps out the door, the evening air cooling around him. As he walks down the path, he looks back once more at the house that had once been silent, now filled with the echoes of a new connection. The camera holds on Margaret as she watches him leave, her face illuminated by the setting sun. She's not alone anymore. And perhaps, she never will be again. Fade out.